Hello and welcome to GuyLogicGaming. My name is Timko and this is Aven Colony, brought to us by the wonderful people over at Mothership Entertainment. Aven Colony is much like the name says, a colony building sim. You'll find yourself in a variety of single player maps in a campaign or sandbox mode, trying to build a futuristic colony and make sure it flourishes in a traditional city building style with a few sci-fi magic tricks up its sleeve. The question is, of course, does it stack up to the other city builders like City Skylines, or does it flop to the ground dead as only SimCity can be? The version I'm currently displaying here is the one after the initial launch with 2 hotfixes, which means that a lot of the initial complaints about performance and crashes have already been sorted with several hotfixes, so keep that in mind. That said, we will be diving into the technical and talking about that specifically. As always, if you're not interested in the technical side of things, as I know some of you are not, the timestamps are available in the video description to bring you to the relevant segment of the video. So let's talk visual quality. Overall, the game can look pretty even on higher settings, and while performance will get spotty once your colony grows large enough, there are some ways you can manage that, though the options available in the options menu do leave a little bit to the imagination. First, the 2 bigger noises are the view distance meter, which merely says very high and doesn't quantify that with any additional information. Does it auto cut off rendering? Does it de-render foliage? Does it remove animated objects, characters, terrain, details? The game doesn't explain. Secondly, the same lack of information applies to the AA, with a slider going up to very high but not showing any other explanations if it's just FXAA times 16 or if it's looking at SMAA or something else entirely. While the other options are mostly self-evident, it still leaves a lot of questions open that have no adequate explanation and do really deserve that, especially when you need to start tweaking settings to keep performance somewhat acceptable down the line. The availability of full screen, windowed, and full screen windowed is offset by the fact that unless VSync is enabled, the game makes my 1080 Ti cry itself into a corner, forcing the beast to run at 100% on the loading screen regardless of what it's doing. A loading screen and main menu should not force a 1080 Ti to its knees because they just tell it to render as much as you can go for it. Not okay. Volume sliders are as you'd expect them to be, but missing a master volume slider, which I feel this game would benefit from having overall, with the sounds being somewhat fiddly to manage on occasion. Not the biggest issue, but a minor annoyance for sure. Now moving swiftly on to gameplay, it does offer a few interesting choices and changes. The most important ones are the options to customize when the game should auto-pause or when pop-ups are allowed by default. While I applaud the inclusion of these options, there are many more alerts, moments, and triggers in the game that I would personally also like to see besides these few. Also, while I like the inclusion of FOV slider, I have to ask, what is the use in a freeform God mode type camera that is not in first or third person to have an FOV slider? So, thanks, but if I could pick and choose, I'd take a tooltip on render distance over this, to be fair. It's not a bad inclusion, it's just weird. Lastly, rebindable keys are always welcome, and the game is available in 6 languages for your enjoyment. Nothing really to add to those segments. That is pretty decent, even though you will control the game mostly through the mouse. That all said and done, let's go ahead and dive into a map that I've already played for a while and talk about all the good and bad, because so far this game is striking the right chords technically, but just missing them with this lack of polish most of the time. And it's that very lack of polish, and that last little bit of taking it a step further, that lies at the core of this title. On the surface, the game ticks all the boxes, and it truly does. From power management and resource allocation and the way food production works, everything on the surface seems pretty set to allow you to build a complex and multi-layered colony on a distant planet. But the issues with every part of this game creep in on the edges when you take a look deeper than a few moments. So let's explore those step by step. First, your primary resource in the game is your population. Now this might sound a little bit strange when most other games don't really use population for more than padding in terms of needing to scale up resources. But here most buildings require people to work them, so their output keeps outputting. This causes 2 main problems in that regard that you can feel through basically every facet of the game. Primarily is that generating population is a very slow process, that doesn't really have a way of being sped up or otherwise influenced. You simply build an immigration center and call it a day. And you can build two, but it doesn't really provide the scaling you might want. The second issue stemming from this first issue becomes quickly apparent. You never have enough people to run the buildings that are required to keep the colony running. This means you're always scaling up the power and food production and its population requirements without being able to expand into other aspects efficiently. This comes from the fact that each building's performance, from power plant to farm, relies on the number of workers inside that building, as well as their overall mood. If they decide to take another job, which has its own issues due to the AI, then your food production might dip to critical levels, and you have little recourse in fixing that, as building more buildings won't help due to the already noted population issues. Now, careful micromanagement of various buildings and their people working them will solve that issue in smaller colonies. But imagine doing that in a 500 plus people colony, and suddenly shoveling people between jobs becomes a job unto itself. This issue is compounded by the fact that you have no ability to activate or deactivate buildings at a whim. If you have a massive stockpile of iron, why does this mine keep churning things out? Let it lie idle while I build my stockpile of food for the winter months. Sadly, this is unavailable, meaning you need to scale up storage as well because the iron keeps coming in. Next up comes the issue of how people in the city take jobs. Overall, they try to stick to jobs that are mostly close to their place of living, even if those jobs are much worse overall for the colony, to the point where them being in that job might actually cause active harm to the colony overall. The AI doesn't really care, and as you have very limited options on herding people into the jobs that need doing, you mostly just end up being forced to plumb down habitats all over the map, which causes its own set of issues. This triple whammy of continual shortage of people, lack of control over buildings, and a weak AI placement results in city placement system that is less about creating a cool colony or even looking at an optimal one. It ends up being all about the least amount of annoyance the various systems in this game cause. Now, this isn't all bad. I personally really like the way the morale system works for inhabitants. Various elements of the colony will make them more or less pleased, and thus work harder or be quite a bit less productive. Things like the quality of oxygen in the colony and the variety of food that are available are logical things that might matter, but other aspects, such as the availability of luxury goods and healthcare, also matter. Keeping these up and running requires you to plan ahead with farms and resource production, as well as smart trading with the off-world vessels using the trade hub. All in all, the system creates quite a bit of depth where you can look towards to see how well you're doing overall with your colony, and serves that purpose quite well. Now, obviously, the game has quite a few contrivances in relation to the sci-fi part of the experience, and we have to expect those as part of the setting. Thankfully, the game doesn't use them to create interesting gameplay aspects, and not so much to try and showcase how fancy their future is, regardless of how little it has to do with any form of science. It's a city building game first, and everything else second, and that is mostly fine. The game takes exceeding levels of care to build environments and maps that feel alien, even while retaining an understandable feeling for the player. Sadly, here, as with all parts of the game, it only succeeds up to a point and then falls flat on its face. Visually, the game looks very nice. The various terrain and creature details are very detailed for a city building title, and the animation quality is overall okay, if not stellar, for all things. Even the small people moving about in these sealed colony tunnels are well animated, and that is a nice little bit of detail. Various parts of the game, such as visual markers for mining location or air vents, are clearly visible and allow for smart planning ahead of time. But again, here as well, the game falls short of its marks in notable methods. The creatures might be nice, but both the lack of creatures in general as well as the lack of variety is striking in its obviousness. When the same creature wheels overhead for the third or fourth time, there is nothing else to be seen anywhere. The same applies for terrain features, where the lack of variety between planets and biomes is again very notable. Yes, the things that are available are nice to look at, and yes, the buildings and mechanics in place are mostly okay, but the sheer lack of variety does kill the variety you have available to create your colony with. And this brings me to the final issue I have, and the biggest structural problem with the title in general, which is gameplay depth. With only a few types of building, you are quickly out of options to diversify. Unlike other building games, where slowly over time, special buildings are placed and built, and they offer a variety in segmentation of zones, a variety of structures based on use cases you might want for a region, the structure-based building here is very static and results in things that a hospital, which is identical in visuals and function to its upgrade, remains rooted in a specific place. This limitation in visuals is already annoying as noted in terms of its biomes, but this lack of depth in mechanics or mechanical options to deal with issues that the game throws at you is its biggest problem. To deal with the weather on the planet such as lightning or a meteor shower, you have exactly one solution, and that solution works 100% of the time without any form of interaction required beyond generic placement, which you do anyway. The same applies to immigration. There is a single immigration building that you can place down in the first few minutes of gameplay, where then subsequently you ignore it from there onward. Even the policies you can enact, where games like City Skylines shine, are limited and quite often useless in most situations. Want to run off battery power because you stored a lot of lightning strikes? You can't, unless you actually don't have the power to trigger it automatically. And most of them in fact are negative modifiers, like rationing food and water, and having no positive ones you can enact to increase productivity or some such, based on a different cost, making this entire policy experience a very limited one indeed. So all in all, this game isn't bad, but it is deeply flawed. Interesting ideas in settlement and progression are hampered by its lack of available options in gameplay. Depth is lost to streamlined progress, and out-of-the-box thinking is unavailable when the answers for optimal gameplay are spoon-fed to your colony across a campaign. If you enjoy the premises, the game offers an enjoyable double dozen hours of content in its campaign, with decent voice acting and some interesting ideas and progressions. But if you come in expecting a new city builder to rival City Skylines, or even rival Anno with all its flaws, you will be somewhat disappointed. Aven Colony tries to reach just a few steps further than the development team could reasonably deliver, and it shows. Elements of the game, from the fact that the building availability is limited, as I mentioned earlier, to the way visual scaling works, to the way colony scaling works, to the way performance scaling works, all of them just stop short of being great and just end up being adequate. So what they've reached here is fine, but it's a far step from excellent, and that is a damn shame. So to bring it all back together, I want to touch upon two main core aspects of this. As we mentioned earlier, the options menu is okay, but limited. It requires more detail, and when you look at the world, the biomes that are available are fairly diverse, but in essence they all boil down to sort of the same idea. You always progress your colony in the same manner, you always move forward with the same notions of your colony. You'll plumb down an immigration center, you'll plumb down a trade hub, then you'll build your second power plant, then you'll build your third power plant, then you'll build a habitat, and you might expand into a couple extra farms or maybe a couple of greenhouses here and there, and that's really it. At that point, you have to vertically scale that up, using more and more of the same things. You level up your buildings, and well, that's really it. There isn't any further scaling in depth. There isn't a layered system on top. There is no optimization available besides the very limited use of tunneling. And because of the way the maps are built in the game, even tying everything together, there's a lot of areas of the map that are inaccessible, and having no form of terraforming that you can control the map around you, and having no way to create your own custom maps, even if you play the sandbox mode, which are mostly just maps recycled from the single player campaign, you end up having what looks to be a very cool experience. And if you're just playing it casually for a bit, it is a very enjoyable experience. It's a very easy to grasp city builder. But if you are somebody that enjoys city building games, it is going to leave you, well, lacking quite fast. And even the interesting mechanics the game offers, from the way lightning can be stored to generate electricity, which on some maps happens a lot, it doesn't allow you the tools to use this as a way to power a part of your colony. You could have multiple power grids fully separated from one another by not connecting two segments of a colony with tunnels, but because of the way everything is tied into those tunnels, you have no way of segregating power across, for example, segregating the availability of food production or delivery of things like police drones, or even the availability of people working in a different segment of the colony as opposed to having a different power network for that region. Everything in the game has been boiled down to its bare component and then expanded a few steps, but never more than a few, and that is a damn shame. Aven Colony is available on Steam, and if you want to check out this interesting but very flawed game, you can do so with a link below. So thank you for watching. If you like this video, do press that like button, and if you want to see more content like this on the channel, just press that subscribe button down below, or check us out on Patreon. There's a link in the description below. So I wish you a good day, and until next time, right here on GuyLogicGaming.